Beau is Afraid is positively, certifiably insane. I could not believe what this movie was as I was watching it. And after having finished it and given myself a few weeks to reflect on the experience, I can't say I'm much closer to connecting with it. The entire film is like one rambling anecdote from a relative who tells stories without ever getting to the point. It's like the musings of a patient in an insane asylum, eating flies as they repeat their nonsensical life story for the 100th time. My issue with the film isn't that it's unconventional, it's that I feel like it has no consequences. As Beau traverses along this long, lonely, and absolutely bonkers road, he doesn't learn any important truths about himself, and he doesn't really grow. He just looks more and more like a severe PTSD victim after every scene. He isn't the hero of the story, just the one who has to suffer through this plot. There are many allusions to Beau being anxious and unsure of himself, so the film's plot can be seen as an extension of his greatest fears. Ultimately, there is no logic to anxiety, because it generally doesn't come from imagining any particular outcome of one's actions. Instead, it's the act itself that causes fear, and the fact that the outcome is unknown until the person tries it. Except in Beau is Afraid, where the entire film serves as the worst possible outcome of an anxious thought. Beau must be on the verge of going into cardiac arrest dozens of times throughout this film, as his circumstances get crazier and crazier, and there seems to be absolutely no internal logic to any of it. The madness is entertaining, but after an hour, I was doubtful that Ari Aster, the film's writer and director, could come up with a way to resolve all of this chaos. And there is no resolution, or at least not a satisfying one. It's fitting that Beau isn't much of an active participant in this story, since he doesn't even seem to be an active participant in his own life. He doesn't have a job, isn't in a relationship, hasn't lost his virginity, and finds his conversations in therapy often returning to the same topic: his relationship with his mother and how her behavior towards him as a child has forever impacted his identity. Even though I rarely found Beau to be a compelling character, since much of his personality is just him acting clueless and terrified all the time, I still pitied him. So when he reaches the forest and watches a play of his life, or a life that he might lead, I found myself wanting him to succeed. After all, he'd been through so much already. Unfortunately, that's only the beginning of his suffering. The play of Beau's alternate life is impressive, with some beautiful animation and rare glimmers of hope for a film as bleak as this. But as with so many moments in this film's second section, I ran out of patience for it long before it reached its conclusion. Whenever I try to formulate my thoughts on Beau is Afraid, I keep coming back to the same problem, which is that I can't enjoy anything about this movie's second half. It's obvious that this play is what Beau wishes his life could be, where he starts a family and feels fulfilled, only to lose everything and endure great suffering, before finally finding his children once again many years later. It's depressing to think of this as Beau's dream life, but it's not hard to see why. He's clearly unhappy and unfulfilled, and has felt this way for many years. Beau probably sees himself in that story because he thinks that suffering is necessary before he can earn his happiness. This way, all these years of hopelessness will have signified something. Unfortunately, as this movie is all too gleeful to show us, there is no meaning to our pain. It simply ends or it doesn't. And for Beau, this nightmare is never ending. It turns out that almost everyone he interacted with throughout the film was part of a grand scheme orchestrated by his mother, who isn't actually dead, despite the announcement of her brutal death being the film's inciting incident. Beau wasn't wrong to always obsess over one particular subject in his therapy sessions, since everything really does lead back to his mother. For the movie's climax, Beau is placed on trial for his sins. The whole thing is a ridiculous farce that continues on and on for an unbearable amount of time. And then he dies. And that's it. Movie over. Look, I get it. His story is a subversion of the hero's quest. It might be true that unlike a typical hero, Beau learns nothing from his experiences. But if there is no grand significance to his pain other than how it makes him feel, he couldn't have learned anything from the bizarre, horrific ordeal he's been put through. By the time the trial starts, it's already clear Beau can't and won't succeed. Very soon after it begins, it also becomes clear that the whole thing is a joke, which makes sitting through the rest of it a slog to get through. I get the sense that the film's ending is supposed to provoke the feeling of, that's it, all that, for nothing? And maybe from there, interesting conversations will flourish about what an ingenious masterpiece this is, for boldly entering territory virtually all stories are too scared to venture towards. But I found myself asking that same question long before the film ended. And then it kept going, and kept going, on and on into meaninglessness. I don't think this would have annoyed me so much if the film had ever felt tethered to reality. There are many stories that contain a heightened sense of reality, or that exist in a realm of controlled chaos. But this film is just pure chaos. With such an outlandish story, it feels like it doesn't know what it wants to be. For example, the events of Beau is Afraid could be a representation of Beau's internal anguish, played out again and again each day, where he experiences brief glimmers of hope before plunging back into despair and hopelessness. Or maybe it's all literal. Ultimately, who cares? It doesn't seem like the writer and director does, so why should we? Why even waste the effort to be annoyed about the film's pointlessness? Look, that's not to say that I found the film to be an entirely negative experience. Obviously, this is Ari Aster we're talking about, so the technical elements are all well done. And I'm sure the film is chock full of details foreshadowing where the story winds up, or Easter eggs for fans of this film or Aster's previous two feature-length movies. But I don't want to spend any more time lingering in an intentionally pointless fictional universe about the pointlessness of misery and anxiety. It's a nice metaphor that applies to everyone's life, but aside from my frustrations over its runtime, I'm still not convinced that it's an interesting enough message to justify a feature-length film. And even if it is, it would only work by earning my emotional investment through a protagonist who does more than just react helplessly to their bizarre surroundings, or with a story that doesn't feel like it could be completely literal or completely metaphorical, and it wouldn't make a difference either way.